and welcome today. While the last few people are coming in and joining, I'm going to give a brief introduction and just thank you for joining us for CF Lead's 75 Introductory Minute Webinar to Results for America List Jacksonville and the Community Foundation for Northeast Florida. My name is Kelly Alexander, and I'm pleased to serve CF Leads as Network Engagement Manager. We're thrilled that you joined us today. Just a couple housekeeping items. Please note that you can hear and see us, but we cannot hear or see you. You can use that chat box to post general comments and the question box for content questions. Please note we're recording this and it will be available later on our YouTube channel, but if at any point you have technical difficulties, you are able to join by phone as well. At this point, it's my pleasure to welcome Mary Thomas, CF Lead's President and CEO, to get us started today.
Thank you, Kelly, and good afternoon, good morning, wherever you may be joining us. I want to welcome you to this webinar. Join Kelly in her remarks and thanking you all for being here today. And in particular, I want to thank Isaiah Oliver, who happens to be the chair of the board of CF Leads and also the president for the Community Foundation for Northeast Florida. Isaiah does a terrific job providing the leadership that we need at this point in time in our work here at CF Leads, and we're grateful for his support of all that we do. We're also very excited to be in partnership with the partners here on the webinar today, Results for America, List Jacksonville. Certainly thank them for their leadership and support of the work that we're doing in trying to advance economic mobility, and I look forward to hearing more from them in this presentation today. I want to give a shout out to our team, Economic Mobility team, led by Dr. Leonard Brock. Thank him for his thought leadership and all that he does to make this program what it is today. I've been here now, I guess I can't keep saying I'm new, but I've been here for about 19 months at CF Leads, having served 25 years at the Spartanburg County Foundation. And we're excited at CF Leads to really advance the work of community leadership. CF Leads is the national network of community foundations committed to community leadership. And it certainly was this work here at CF Leads that transformed the work of our community foundation here in Spartanburg, South Carolina, leading the organization to establish the first Center for Philanthropy in the South. All of that is really attributed to the framework that community leadership provides to those community foundations who truly want to do transformative work in place-based communities. We have learned and know through our work here at CF Leads that hundreds of community foundations come together to take advantage of the many different offerings that we have, whether you're exploring your work through our peer cohorts, or whether you're going through one of our executive leadership institutes for CEOs or VPs. We strengthen the community leadership muscle of community foundations, and we share field innovations so that community foundations have the tools that they need to tackle some of the most toughest issues of our time. One of the reasons why I took this job, the Bridgespan Group had just completed our new strategic plan that really helps us focus on our greatest opportunities for the future. And one of those is reasserting our position as a field leader in this work and helping community foundations understand and see that they are a community partner. And when they position themselves as a community partner, this is where we truly see the community foundation creating a better future for all by helping them pursue some of the greatest opportunities and address some of the most critical challenges of our time. And they do this by inclusively uniting people, institutions, and resources from throughout the community so that we have those lasting results to share. So again, the community foundation of today that is really doing that transformative work is the community foundation that has positioned themselves as an anchor organization in place-based communities and really setting itself apart as a community partner. As we think about the future, again, we will be working over the next few years in helping to get more and more community foundations on what we call the ladder of community leadership, and helping community foundations see themselves more than that charitable bank. Certainly, we understand that the transactional work is important, but really doing the leadership work that moves some of these critical issues of in our communities is also equally important. We have 5 core competencies that we focus on, and those include working across the 3 sectors, advancing public policy, marshaling resources to the field, resident engagement, and just doing all of those things that's necessary to really arm community foundations to activate change. And so they gave me a few minutes to talk about CF Leads, and I could certainly take the 75 minutes and go deeper within how we do this work, but we're not going to do that today. We're going to kick it over to Dr. Leonard Brock, who's going to give you an overview and update on CF Leads economic mobility work. So again, welcome, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Mary, for your inspiring words and for setting the stage. I'm delighted to be here with you all today. I also want to thank our partners from Results for America, the Community Foundation for Northeast Florida, and LISC Jacksonville for joining us today. Your leadership in the field is critical, and we are grateful for your willingness to share your insights with community foundations across the country. As we know, economic mobility is of critical importance to the Community Foundation field. Last year, we spent time hearing directly from community foundations about the specific areas of economic mobility they want to address. What we learned is that there's a real hunger for tools and strategies to help accelerate and amplify the work already underway and to jumpstart work that is of importance and priority in communities at the infancy stage of their economic mobility strategies. CF Leads recognize that community foundations are at the forefront of this work, and today's conversation is about equipping you with one of the most powerful tools available, programmatic data. Today's webinar is part of our effort to reach community foundations more broadly and more widely. We understand that not all foundations have the capacity or time to engage in a more intensive activities like regional convenings or high-touch engagements, such as our Economic Mobility Action Network, what we refer to as EMON. Webinars like this provide what we call a light touch opportunity, an accessible way to introduce key tools and information that you can take back to your communities, regardless of where you are on your economic mobility journey. Today, we're excited to introduce you to Results for America's Economic Mobility Catalog, one of several critical resources we're highlighting as part of our broader work on economic mobility. Results for America, our public goods resource partner, has developed this catalog to help communities better understand evidence-based and promising practices and how these implications can be used to drive more equitable outcomes. Results for America is one of the strategic partners we are working with in this space. Alongside Urban Institute and Opportunity Insights, Results for America is helping us to equip community foundations with the tools needed to accelerate or amplify the work on economic mobility. This work is generously supported by the Gates Foundation and works in service of a community of practice, also facilitated by colleagues at Results for America. The community of practice allows us to share learnings, best practices, and strategies to support the field. As you hear from our speakers today, I encourage you to think about how you might use the tools and information they present in your local context. Whether you're just getting started or have been working in this space for a while, there's something here for everyone. And remember, information and increased awareness is just the beginning. It's not the end goal, it's an opportunity to help inform strategy and policy, which ultimately drive the outcomes we're all striving for. As CF Leads, we are committed to supporting your journey no matter where you are. After today's session, we'll be sharing additional resources, including opportunities for follow-up discussions, peer learning opportunities, and links to some of the tools we're highlighting today. Thank you again for joining us. We're excited to see how you leverage these tools to continue to advance economic mobility in your communities. With that said, I would like to turn things over to my colleagues Ross and Leslie at Results for America, who will now take the platform.
Wonderful. Leonard, thank you so much for the introduction, and CF Leads team, thank you so much for putting this together. It's great to be here. As I said to you guys before the call, it's just been such a great partnership all year, so we really, really appreciate you. And we so appreciate James and Christopher, you joining us from the Community Foundation of Northeast Florida and LISC Jacksonville as well. Leslie, could I ask you to share slides, please? For everyone in the audience, I'll just provide a few framing remarks on Results for America as an organization, and then I'll turn it over to my colleague, Leslie Gruber, who will walk you through the catalog and share some of our observations about the terrific work that's been happening in Jacksonville that we were able to highlight in the catalog. So for those of you who don't know, Results for America is a national nonprofit. We are nonpartisan, and our mission is to make investing in what works the new normal across the public and social sector. So we envision a world where data and evidence are used by all kinds of decision makers, particularly in government. And through that use of data and evidence, we see very meaningful progress towards accelerating economic opportunity and closing racial gaps. We do this work in a few different ways. So we work hand in hand with government partners to help them build their data and evidence capacity. So how they are collecting data, how they're analyzing data, how they're using that data in their decision-making processes. We help governments unlock and then shift dollars towards strategies that have good evidence of effectiveness. And on our side of the house, on the Economic Mobility Catalog team, we are supporting the replication of solutions that have good evidence of effectiveness. So we do this through implementation-focused publications, and then there's a whole world of technical assistance work that we do with jurisdictions as well to help them stand up a strategy with good evidence. A few of the core principles that animate our work at Results for America, and particularly on the catalog team, the first is that local decisions really matter. So if any of you have looked at the data from Opportunity Insights in the past year or so, it is amazing to see how the landscape of upward mobility has changed over the course of the past 25 years. And a huge reason for that is because of local decisions that have shaped this landscape of opportunity for residents across the country. The second truth that grounds us is that there are a lot of effective solutions that are out there. There's just been an immense amount of research devoted to determining what is effective, what is not effective, and that all exists in the world. We do recognize, though, that it's hard to find that evidence. The third principle for us that animates our work is that implementation is so important. There's no such thing as an off-the-shelf solution that automatically works if you replicate it in your community. Programs and initiatives that have good evidence need to be implemented with fidelity. They need to be launched thoughtfully in partnership with community. And without that attention paid to implementation, the results of programs and initiatives that may have worked somewhere else may not work in your community. So with those three truths in mind, that is what inspired us to create this resource, the Economic Mobility Catalog. So the purpose of this resource is to help government leaders and their partners, like community foundations, identify strategies that have good evidence, and then actually implement those strategies through a range of content that exists in the catalog that Leslie will share with you in a moment. We try our best to put ourselves in the shoes of local decision makers whenever we publish anything in the Economic Mobility Catalog. So this is designed to answer the kinds of questions that leaders like yourself might have when you first encounter a new strategy, when you're first getting pitched on a new idea. Questions like, within my portfolio, does this strategy have good evidence? Who else has implemented this strategy? What are those key concepts related to implementation that are going to drive success, et cetera? Again, you'll hear much more about this in a few minutes. So that's sort of the animating spirit of the Economic Mobility Catalog that we created. CF Leads team, I believe that there is a poll that you might share with our attendees. So if you could go ahead and do that, that would be wonderful. I'll give folks just a minute to fill that out. Okay. Okay, great. So we've got some newbies to the Economic Mobility Catalog. That is perfect. You're going to learn all about it in just a few minutes. If we could advance to the next slide. Oh, specifically for community foundations. So the catalog, as I said, is designed for local government leaders and their partners in the social sector, in the philanthropic sector. We know that you as community foundation leaders play such an important partnership role with the local governments that you work alongside. So specifically for you, just a few ideas of how the catalog might be useful. So similar to the function that we envision for local government leaders, the catalog is a really powerful tool to help you find strategies across a whole range of policy areas that have good evidence that might align with your portfolio goals. Also, as I said, so much of the catalog's content is focused on implementation. We know that implementation limitations are so often the factor that leads to initiatives not being so successful. So we really put a lot of energy into surfacing those implementation relevant factors whenever we're writing about a program in the catalog. The third way that you might use the catalog is to see how successful initiatives have been implemented elsewhere. So we have a very large number of case studies. You'll learn more about one of those later on in this webinar, but we have a very wide range of content that shows you who else has done this sort of thing, who has done this sort of thing well. So with that, I will turn it over to Leslie, who is going to give you a walkthrough of the resource itself.
Awesome. Thanks, Ross. Would love to now kind of make this resource real and kind of show you what it looks like in practice. So we always forget to say it is completely free. It's a publicly available website. I believe it was linked in the chat. You can access it on any computer or smartphone. And when you go to the website, this is what you will see. This is the homepage. And all of our resource types that I'll highlight today are organized by both issue area on the left here, as well as by outcome. And highlighting a first type of resource, I'll just click on one of our issue areas. These are called our strategy guides. So when you navigate to an issue area page, you'll see that first we kind of have an overview of what that issue area is. In this case, housing is quite straightforward. And then beneath that, there's a table of all of the evidence-based strategy guides, as we call them, that relate to that issue area. A strategy guide is really the highest level resource from kind of scope that we have in the catalog, in that it represents the umbrella, so to speak, of evidence-based tactics, approaches, or programs that fall within this issue area, and there's evidence to support their efficacy in this case, affecting change on housing stability and displacement prevention. So when you look at a strategy guide, you'll see kind of the who, what, where, when, why of that strategy. The overview being, you know, when we talk about making an intervention related to housing stability, what are the actions we're really talking about? What are those tactics and programs that have been shown to work? We provide a list of the evidence supporting that strategy. We provide a linkage to two different metrics frameworks. One is our partner from the Urban Institute, the other is Mathematica. And the idea here is really that we provide a way to link metrics and data that you're seeing in your community to the strategies that are related to it. So if you see opportunity to improve housing affordability, for example, in your community, housing stability and displacement prevention interventions might be one place to look. Next, we also provide an overview of implementation best practices here. And then when you get to the bottom of any strategy guide, you'll see our next two type of resources that I'd like to highlight. The case studies come first, the pictures right here. which I will return to in just a moment. But beneath that, we have what we call our program briefs, or evidence-based examples, as they're listed here. These represent kind of the one click down beneath the strategy and give you a similar overview of a particular program model that has evidence behind it and has been shown to be effective. These are sometimes branded or affiliated with a particular regional or national nonprofit service provider, as is the case with family self-sufficiency programs, or sometimes they are not necessarily branded or affiliated with one organization, like a community land trust. But when I say community land trust, there's a generally shared understanding of what that program or intervention looks like. I'll also just highlight here before clicking into one that we use an evidence ranking system for programs. We'll first caveat by saying all of these are evidence-based in our minds, but we'd like to give a sense for how strong or how mature the evidence is related to each of these interventions. So if a program has multiple rigorous evaluations supporting its efficacy, we give it a proven or green ranking on the right here. If it has a single rigorous evaluation or multiple less rigorous evaluations, we give it a strong ranking, or the orange one in the middle. And then if a program is newer, evidence is coming out, or there are some less rigorous studies that have been shown to be that have proven effectiveness on these programs, we give it a promising ranking on the left here. But as I said, in our eyes, it has to be evidence-based prior to making it into the catalog. So clicking on one of these, you'll see these program briefs look very similar to the strategy guides, but they focus specifically on one intervention, gives you the overview, the evidence, and talks about implementation best practices. And then at the bottom, again, we link any relevant case studies. These are kind of the topic of the day today, so I'll go through them quickly. The case studies are different in that they focus on the civics or narrative story behind how a particular intervention was successfully implemented in a community somewhere in the country. So whereas the other two types of resources focus on kind of the mechanics and the evidence behind the intervention itself, these really give you an in-depth look into the results and accomplishments of a particular solution, the challenges that were being experienced on a local level that made local leaders want to act. A discussion of how local leaders went about overcoming obstacles and designing the intervention, as well as a pretty in-depth look at the timeline and logistics of how they went about actually implementing it in their community. One last resource type that I want to highlight before jumping back to our slides are called our implementation support pages. These refer to the curriculum from our solution sprints, which Ross mentioned earlier. We do a lot of technical assistance as an organization, one of which are 6 to 12 week long shared cohort learning experiences where jurisdictions that are seeking to implement a particular solution can come together, learn about it from experts, and kind of action plan working towards implementing it. And these pages here give you an idea for what that experience was like for participants, as well as a way to explore kind of like asynchronously the material and learning experience that was offered during those sprints. Last thing I'll just point out as we're talking about case studies today is that if you go to the top here, there's a page dedicated specifically to our case studies, and you can look and see kind of the wide array of geographies we have represented. I think we're at 59 case studies as of this week in the catalog, and you can also filter by issue area as well as outcome here if you're looking specifically for the case studies. Jumping back to our slides, just wanted to land on this page and reinforce this kind of breakdown. I know going through a walkthrough, it can be a lot, especially for those of you who are less familiar with the catalog at the onset of today's webinar. But we really have 4 resource types. The strategy guides are those highest level kind of umbrellas under which all of the program briefs and case studies fall. The program briefs represent the specific evidence-based program models and give you kind of like the overview and implementation guidance related to those. The case studies are the narrative stories that tell you how a particular jurisdiction implemented a solution successfully. And then the implementation support pages are that commemorated curricula from our solution sprints. Wanted to quickly dive into a little bit of a closer look on our strategy guides. I think I failed to mention that we have 55 of these across the 11 different issue areas within the catalog. The one that I just walked through a few minutes ago was one of our original strategy guides, but excitingly, just wanted to plug that we are in the process of significantly expanding all of those strategy guides. So you'll see here on the right-hand side, the 4 orange boxes represent new content that we are building into all of the strategy guides with the aim of making them more implementation oriented and more apt for helping local leaders replicate solutions. We're doing this by compiling panels of experts who are both researchers and practitioners related to each strategy, and having them kind of consult and provide input as to what the content should be related to those expertise areas that they hold. And we'll just plug that Christopher, who you'll hear from in a minute, is one of our experts for our wealth building strategy guide. So some really exciting content related to this topic coming there. And then next, just wanted to do a little bit of a deeper look into the case studies as well. I have listed out here all of the things that you'll find in the case studies, but really wanted to highlight that we have 2 case studies in the catalog that feature success stories that were supported by community foundations, one of which is, of course, the Heirs property work led by LISC Jacksonville and supported by the Community Foundation of Northeast Florida. But also we have a case study related to a high school equivalency diploma program, and that was supported by the Racine, Wisconsin Community Foundation, which is really exciting as well. And I'll just kind of shamelessly plug here that we are always looking for more case studies. I think we're going to touch on this a little bit later, perhaps during the Q&A, but we, as you know, are trying to highlight success stories that have happened around the country. And if any of you are supporting these stories across the country, it would be great to have more community foundation representation in here as well. And then one final plug from us before we get into the meat of the Heirs property discussion. We do offer tailored sessions with Ross and I. If anybody is interested in kind of training your colleagues or sharing this resource with anybody else that you work with, grantees, the like, please reach out to us. We love kind of working directly with jurisdictions or people working in local communities to try and support economic mobility work across the country. And with that, I think I will pass it to James and Christopher.
Thank you, Leslie. Appreciate the warm introduction. And thanks to CF Leads for having us today. It's fun to be able to tell a Jacksonville story to folks out there that are interested in hearing about some of this good work. I'm James Coggin. I work with the Community Foundation for Northeast Florida. We're based here in Jacksonville and serve a 6-county region. I serve as our senior director for grant making impact investing, where I have the good pleasure of working with my friend Christopher Smith here. Christopher, you want to say hi?
Hey, thanks, James. Good to meet everyone and looking forward to the conversation about our work.
Yeah, and I think the story of the work of our 2 organizations together, it goes back a ways. Back in 1999, our foundation, along with a local private foundation, the foundation for our local NFL franchise, the Jaguars in the city, came together to bring LISC Jacksonville to our market, specifically to help us solve problems like these. We were looking for an organization that could help us build capacity, provide capital, and provide the kind of specialized technical assistance on issues like this one that are important to neighborhoods here in our communities, but require an expertise that LISC is known for bringing to the table around the country. So since '99, we've enjoyed that ongoing relationship, which our foundation has in part fostered by providing the consistent operating and program support that's necessary for LISC to do the important work that it does and to bring the expertise that folks like Christopher bring to our geography. And with that work, our latest evolution at the Community Foundation dates to 2015 through our Supporting Neighborhoods Initiative, which is our kind of key leadership initiative at this point. And it's really focused at the bottom line on inclusive prosperity in neighborhoods. We have kind of some pretty significant disparities across geographies within our region. And so Supporting Neighborhoods was launched by our staff and trustees in 2015 as a way to try and find solutions, places for investment through partners that we could incent that inclusive prosperity. And a lot of that work is focused on issues around strengthening neighborhood leadership, increasing the supply of affordable housing, and expanding access to economic opportunity, which this kind of body of work that is Heir's property touches on all three of these areas. So when Christopher brought this up for the first time a few years back, it seemed like a great fit, although it was somewhat nebulous, and we had a lot to learn on the front end before jumping in, but it's been a very robust partnership. So Christopher, do you want to give some of that background on Heir's property and how it came to be on your radar?
Yeah, James. I mean, it was sort of fluky because in sort of the midst of peak COVID, Brookings report came out, and so everyone's familiar, right, with some data around sort of Black home ownership and Black home values. And it essentially said in Jacksonville, there's about a $23,000 difference when you look at a home in a Black neighborhood, majority Black neighborhood. You take that same home and put it elsewhere across the city. And so what we wanted to know was what's driving that devaluation of homes in neighborhoods where you have majority BIPOC. That led to some pulling of a string and a series of other questions. And so one of the insights here is the value of working with our place-based partners at the Community Foundation has been, what are the right questions we should be thinking about? And amongst those, I give you a few that we chewed on. Who owns the neighborhood? Who's the most vulnerable? And who has, in this case, bad title? And what we meant by bad title was that folks who are acting as formal owners of the home, they're living there, they're paying taxes, they're paying utilities, but do not have legal ownership of the house. They don't have clear title. They don't have a deed with their name on it. It turned out in Jacksonville that there was a preponderance of that. There was a high concentration of Heirs properties, well over 10,000, according to our latest data, which meant that these properties were unable, and the occupants were unable to access the home equity. They were unable to use that equity for things like paying for college, starting a business, etc. And that was driving down home values. So that became sort of the center of the table, was how might we attack this challenge by addressing home ownership from a preservation perspective and sort of flipping on the head what we typically think of when we approach home ownership. So I think I'll pause there and say that was sort of the initial work, and the conversation with James and I was back and forth about what's this preservation, strategy look like, and who needs to be involved in the conversation to help bring about solutions, or at least learning about how we would go about tackling this issue.
Yeah, and that framing around questions and just the kind of the process of one question always led to another in those conversations with us, I think was kind of the driver from my end, Christopher, is it just sparked so much curiosity because I think we had an idea that there was a problem, but I think there were so many facets to this problem and figuring out what the strategy was and even what the root problem to all of the things that were encompassed in this was what was so intriguing from a funder's perspective and engaging with you and trying to figure out, okay, where do we plug in here?
Yeah. And so why, from my perspective, why from where I look at it, why engage James? And the point there was because there's a vested interest because it's a place-based funder. They're not going anywhere. So this isn't about a grant cycle. And so because the Community Foundation has been around for quite some time in this community, has invested in community development initiatives, it made sense to engage the Community Foundation and James around this to understand where might there be some overlap, where might there be some synergies. And one of the ways we found opportunity was around this notion of inclusive prosperity and how this issue of addressing the inequities around legal, financial, and title systems might be inhibiting inclusive prosperity in neighborhoods that we both care about.
Yeah, and that term inclusive prosperity since the start of this process has become like the center of my lexicon for describing what we do in supporting neighborhoods here because we like you guys at LISC, I mean, are invested in not only seeing neighborhoods improve, but seeing neighborhoods improve and the folks indigenous to that community improve with it. To realize those gains and to see ownership in real estate that has been in many cases generational generate economic outcomes beyond, I think, what I originally thought when we began talking about this, which was as I kind of first entered this conversation with you, I was thinking housing, 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 housing. How do we preserve housing? Because a lot of the neighborhoods we're talking about are also neighborhoods where the housing supply is most affordable. And that is becoming more scarce by the day. But
Yeah.
as we go on deeper and deeper into this, there's so many more parts to what the actual outcomes of this heirs property work are.
Yeah, and so to get to the, to nip it in the bud, were a couple of things that could happen from initial sort of early seed capital, grant capital that would be deployed in this kind of sort of experiment. One is this notion of folks who don't have clear title are unable to access housing assistance programs like home repair. And so if we could help people get title to the home, they may be able to age in place. They may be able to be inoculated from gentrification or displacement forces that are happening around them. And so to get to home repair, we needed to deal with this gnarly issue of title.
Yep.
And so funding legal aid, supporting outreach and education around how do you work through and persist through a titling process was critical for us to then get to the prize, which is eligibility for these housing assistance programs.
Yeah. And I reflect back as we were talking about this in preparation for this webinar, like the kind of the jumping off point for the foundation's like true engagement in this work as a partner. And that was actually kind of an unrelated grant, I think, when we started working on it. And this was, again, back in the COVID days where there was an earned income tax credit funders network grant opportunity that, I think it was a mutually interesting proposition to figure out how to tap into the EITC as a asset building wealth preservation tool. But, I think these things were kind of happening simultaneously. And what we found is that, I'm jumping all over the screen here, but that there was kind of this mutual need between that opportunity and the heirs property opportunity in that we needed to build relationships with community through trusted partners. I mean, what was your experience like as we secured that grant funding? We partnered with you and a few local neighborhood CDCs to begin kind of, I guess, in simplest form, building trust so we could have these conversations, right?
Yeah, I mean, so, earned income tax credit, critically important in these vulnerable neighborhoods, in vulnerable households within these neighborhoods that are unable to withstand the financial shocks of a medical debt, of a job loss, or any increase in taxes, right? So where's that revenue going to come from? So earned income tax credit was a potential way, right, to generate more earnings and income into the household. But the key for this piece of it was, who will people listen to? So identifying trusted, credible partners who are embedded in these communities and supporting them and seeing how it may increase. Might this increase the uptake of earned income tax credit? And is that something that can then be transferred to something like titling assistance? If folks are able to tell that story around, hey, here's how you may be able to increase the revenue coming in by going through this earned income tax credit during tax season, might you also want to now lean on an interest around stabilizing the home that you're living in, but don't have clear title? So legal aid, if we connect you, right? So if we can identify these connectors and invest in them, might they help folks who are in a vulnerable state get connected to the resources they need? So that's a long way of saying this really was about the trust now leveraging new connections for folks to achieve financial security.
Absolutely. And I think as we learned it through that first grant, that's where kind of our first direct investment into Heir's property came. And it really wasn't even to LISC at this point. I think
Yeah.
we had some other open grants that other work, but as this was bubbling up, you kind of reached out and said, you know, look, I've got another neighborhood here. As we're learning about kind of the scale and concentration of this problem, but they've got an all volunteer organization that really is limited on capacity. They know the folks, they have the relationships, but they don't have a big budget. They don't have the resources to really go out and do this as they exist today.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that was another insight, which is leveraging the existing grantee network of a place-based funder. Because Community Foundation, James will know who they've been supporting or who they've got a relationship with that we may be able to leverage to now generate greater impact in that particular neighborhood or geography. And so in this case, a resident-led neighborhood association with a executive director, chair of the board, who's an 80-year-old grandmother, who's a fire, she's a pistol, but
Absolutely.
she's a straight shooter. People trust her. And that's what we needed in order to open the door for people to feel like they could walk through it and trust that this process is going to lead to a potential outcome that's going to be beneficial to them.
Yeah. And that's when I think once we had this team of neighborhood-based organizations out there talking to folks,
Yeah.
connecting to legal aid, to me, that's when like a whole nother set of questions started happening, which were more around kind of, wait, how big is this problem actually? How much of a bite are we really taking of this apple? Because it started to feel, as I recall, and experience at the time, that all of a sudden the apple felt way bigger than we thought it was.
Yeah. Yeah. It's true. Yeah. It was you know what? And it gets back to how are we able to capture the state of folks, whether it's vulnerability related to housing or related to income and earnings. What evidence do we have to suggest that we can design and tailor an intervention to arrest that, to slow that down? And I think that's what we were finding was in some neighborhoods, and place-based funders know this, there's some neighborhoods that have sort of several layers of distress. And if we see one, it's likely that there may be several others there, but one may actually help us address the other layers of stress in the neighborhood. And so whether it's coming in through earned income tax credit or coming at it from titling, we're reducing vulnerability in the neighborhoods that we know are the most under-resourced, right? And the ones that would benefit the greatest from understanding the challenge and where they are now and listening to them to determine how best to go about intervening in a way that we're alongside them.
Yeah. And I think as a funder, what is so interesting about this body of work, you talked about those different stress points that are causing kind of friction for neighborhoods. And it really takes a partnership, a coalition of nonprofit organizations that bring different skill sets and different values to the table to do this well. So as a funder, there were just so many entry points for us to support this work. And it wasn't just a single organization that we supported. We did have a chance to make investments through LISC or property tax relief, but we also had a chance to invest in several neighborhood organizations to help them with the outreach side of it, which is critical. We had opportunities to invest with data partners like Smart North Florida, who are going out there and helping us figure out how to sort through all this data to really target this work better and be more efficient. And then we have, legal services out there where there's opportunities to engage directly to support the provision of free legal services for that title work. So, I mean, it's really an ecosystem we're talking about, right? To do
Yeah,
this.
it is. It is, and it's it's laid out in the ecosystem. I'm sorry, in this case study that Results for America did. So one of the things there for folks, RFA helped me stop and actually take notice of what we've been working on over the past 2 to 3 years, document it, and then reflect on what worked and what didn't work. So that was the benefit of going through that case study process, right? So I highly recommend it. But to this ecosystem notion, I think it's critically important to understand, at least what we learned was that we needed to figure this thing out almost like puzzle pieces. You're bringing these varying stakeholders to the table. When we could set a table where there's shared understanding of the challenge, what is it we're all in agreement around that's at play? And from there, how might we see each other either in relationship to each other or working towards a common goal? And so, legal, you're coming at it from one angle with legal aid and supporting folks there. Outreach, critically important. Again, without trust, I mean, this work moves at the speed of trust, right? And so we needed that. We need to understand it, invest in it. And it's almost like, you know, we have to invest in the ecosystem because we don't know when we'll need it. We don't know when we'll need a particular cog in the system. So you got to continue to support it because when the distress hits, right, when the shock occurs, we need all of the partners to be able to marshal their resources quickly and be able to address the issue. So ecosystem approach, spot on. Working through a community foundation or a place-based funder is critically important for us to build confidence in the market. We need a philanthropy to understand whether it's national, regional, or local, that there's buy-in. And so the buy-in could come from the conversation James and I were having and what insights we were seeing over time.
Absolutely. And I think, to me, some of the most exciting stuff that's come out of this is really seeing, looking back and reflecting that, you know, at the beginning of this process, as we're investing in outreach and we're talking about how to engage communities and specifically residents that need these services and how to identify them. Initially, we were like sending people out walking blocks, just, you know, you take Shirley Street and you walk 5 blocks to the end of it, and you come back the next street and walk back up and hit every house on the way. To me, one of the more kind of exciting parts of this, like not what we'd see in a grant report as an outcome, but like one of the big successes is that we've been able to figure out how to use data and use it in a way that is bringing in the public sector as a partner to help find folks that need these services and intervene more quickly. Because one of the things that I've kind of taken to heart through this process, learning from you, Christopher, is that like this is a competitive environment. There are people on the other side of the equation here who have a vested interest in seeing this not work. So we have to be as quick, if not more quick and nimble than they are, right?
Yeah, it's right. I mean, again, institutional investors are quite active and aggressive in these lower value neighborhood markets, housing markets, and what it's doing is they're out competing buyers in that demographic. So if you're trying to buy a home sub 250 value, you may be competing with, you know, an institutional, you know, actor, a corporate actor who may come in with a cash offer and close in 7 days, as opposed to going through FHA or some traditional financing model. So it becomes critically important for us to now look at the map of where distress may be occurring at the parcel level, and to the extent we can now get out and reach folks sooner rather than later, rather than waiting on the monthly community meeting or a newsletter, we're able to now go to them and have conversation about what they see their future looking like and how we might have an opportunity to help them get there. And so you're right, the data thing's been critical. The trust, so data, trust, and then being adaptable and flexible. I think one of the things I've enjoyed in our conversations, James, is being able to pivot and understand that, hey, there may be other ways we can come at this work and still help generate positive impact in neighborhoods, whether it's through property tax relief, heirs work, or otherwise. And so that's been really another sort of aha for me is, yes, having large grant capital support is useful, but it's the thought partnership, it is the ability to convene, you know, folks and generate shared understanding, and then public will through these sort of research briefs and data points. I think that's over time paid off for us.
I agree. I mean, that's the one thing looking back that, you know, when I reflect on how I viewed this day one, that I would have I wish I would have had the more informed perspective that I have now, because I mean, again, this is a housing issue. There's no doubt we're talking about real estate, but I think that's really wrapped around what is more of an anti-displacement in economic mobility strategy in terms of we're helping people access what are today kind of frozen or lost assets that have been in families for years, but to your point, they can't tap it, they can't use it to access capital, they can't take care of the property because of these unresolved issues. So with kind of our North Star for supporting neighborhoods, again, being that inclusive prosperity where neighborhoods improve and people's outlooks improve with the neighborhood. I mean, this is an important way for neighborhoods in our geography that are facing kind of that gentrification, to make sure that folks have their foothold in this community that has been their foothold, that is their home, and they're benefiting right along with it, and we're not losing too much those institutional investors, because at that point, you know, we're not only losing assets and households, but we're losing the identity and the sense of place that is that the community and what it's meant to the folks in it.
That's right. And you're spot on. I wouldn't add anything else other than if you want to get bottom line with it, we've over the last 3 years invested about $1.2 million, right, in these various puzzle pieces, legal, right, outreach, and even sort of data, right? So 1.2 million invested over the past 3 years. What we're now looking at is close to $30 million in total tax assessed home value that's been preserved or stabilized in 3 years. And so that's pretty good in return on investment there. And more to the point, it's built a followership and constituency now with the neighborhood associations now coming together and using data to help generate more awareness and faster momentum around how to take on these issues sooner rather than later.
Absolutely. And before we jump over to the Q&A, I think there's one opportunity for a little teaser of what's to come, because this little seed that was planted in Jacksonville has now grown to touch multiple counties here in Northeast Florida, and it's growing far beyond that, right? With the LISC network.
Yeah, I mean, so having regional touch with this work has been critically important. So we're now looking at some of it's not just the urban and suburban issue. This is definitely touching rural. So again, for place-based funders, it cuts across the strata. But we've been fortunate now to attract resources to think about scale. And so we're going to be doing this, replicating this work in some version in about 8 different markets across the country. You know, Atlanta, Richmond, Detroit, you know, San Antonio, Houston, Cleveland, Cincinnati, folks, places like that, Mississippi Delta. We're bringing this approach to those markets in ways that we think can stick, that it can generate the kind of return that we've been talking about today.
Well, you know, as one place-based funder in one place, I can say the impacts of this work in our region have been incredible, and I'm really grateful to you and the LISC team and all the partners for digging into this issue and finding ways to address what had been an unjust system and make it a little better. And I'm looking forward to continue working on this.
Ditto. And CF Leads, Results for America, and James, appreciate the time, man. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. All right. Well, I think we're turning it over to Leonard for Q&A here.
Absolutely. Sincere appreciation for the insights and the information shared with those who are participating in this webinar, but more importantly, we're going to be able to permeate the field with this information. So I do have a few questions, and for those who are attending, if you have any questions, please feel free to place those in the chat and I'll respond to those accordingly. So Christopher, James, Leslie, and Ross, again, thank you so much for what you shared. And I do have a number of questions that I want to walk through. I'm not going to get through all of these questions. We probably have roughly 15 minutes. So I'll ask the first question. And Leslie and Ross, this is something I'm actually going to pitch to you two. We hear from small and rural community foundations, they don't always see themselves in some of the resources or the tools that we look to expose them to. So can you talk about how smaller and rural community foundations can effectively use the economic mobility catalog to identify actionable strategies within their limited resources?
Yep, absolutely. It's a great question, something that we think about a lot. We do try to highlight the great work that's happening in small and mid-sized communities whenever we're able. So as Leslie said before, we are constantly on the lookout for success stories that we can lift up, write a case study of, and sort of hold as a national model in the economic mobility catalog. So if you've got some stories for us, please reach out. We're eager to hear it. I think that the most important way that we are trying to approach this is in our strategy guides, where we are surfacing, as Leslie said, these key design principles that drive successful initiatives. So we know that on matters of scale, on matters of staffing, often even things like being able to fully assess the landscape in places where, for a very small government thinking, economic development department in a rural area that might only have one staffer. How can we be providing at least some guidance on, if you are putting together an initiative, what are those elements of the DNA that we have seen really drive success and that experts have identified to us as really the core pieces? So, when programs are working in larger urban areas, for example, there might be all kinds of considerations that have driven success in that place. But in our strategy guides, we are trying to isolate those design characteristics that are completely generic. What are the pieces of this that really drive success? And, just to choose the example that James and Christopher were talking about, this trusted messenger dynamic so drove success in Jacksonville. That's the kind of thing that, the staffing might look pretty different in how you achieve that, which partners you work with. In Jacksonville versus maybe a more rural area. But the principle of having a trusted messenger and doing this work feels like it can be universally applicable. So that's just one way that we try to provide guidance here that hopefully can be useful to smaller communities. Leslie, anything you want to add on that?
The only thing I'd add is that we, for our pitch to meet with you all directly one-on-one, if you're interested, we meet very frequently with jurisdictions from around the country, and lately have been meeting a lot with very small rural jurisdictions in different places in the US. And something that we're hearing from them pretty frequently is that as a really small resource constrained jurisdiction, they tend to find that they lose out on funding opportunities from state and federal government. And so I think that as a community foundation in those places, you all have a really unique opportunity to be kind of the catalyst for being able to implement these kind of interventions in places that federal funding might not easily reach.
Thank you. Thank you. Those trusted, credible partners are absolutely critical to move the work forward. And I'm glad that came up in conversation. So it's not just the information or the message, but the messenger. Speaking of which, being able to maintain efficacy and fidelity as it relates to scaling or implementing a best practice or a promising practice is something that is fraught sometimes with successes, like you just made reference, and challenges. So James and Christopher, what has been the biggest challenges? And you talked about some of the successes, but if you want to expound on that, that's perfectly fine as well, as it relates to implementing the heirs property programming, and how has it advanced economic mobility in your community?
I think the first challenge that our foundation faced in engaging on this work is building the understanding necessary to really effectively respond to what folks need. I mean, this is a fairly complex issue. It comes at folks in communities from a lot of different angles. So as a funder, to effectively be a grant maker here, you need to have some basic understanding. We have the good fortune of a partner like Lisk and staff there like Christopher to help translate for us and help us get our heads around this so we can get to the ultimate answer that helps. But that was the kind of the first hurdle along the way, was doing the learning on an issue that was very new and I think very nascent for us. It wasn't something we'd spent a lot of time on, but I think the payoff was really great. And I mean, just looking at it on a smaller scale in terms of one community foundation grant. I mean, the first grant that we made to Lisk on this was to support property tax relief, because what they were finding is that in order to resolve people's title issues, there were property taxes and arrears that had to be paid. So we helped seed a fund with the local property appraiser's office that provided tax relief to folks that were engaged in the program. And I think out of that grant, like 40,000 or so of our funds were used to support that. And just that investment alone preserved like 2 million plus in real estate value and ownership. So like those are numbers we don't get very often when you talk about impact of a grant that size, to have a measurable monetary impact of 50x. I mean, that's something that's fantastic. I think speaks to the importance of this work and the huge impact that local funders can make in supporting it.
Awesome.
Christopher, what do
I
you
have a
think?
couple of things. Yeah, I have a couple of things. One, an issue like this is a sort of quiet, silent uh, barrier, right? So it's not something that's in the news every other day, like the need for down payment assistance, right? And it's sort of outside of the way in which we think traditionally about how do you help folks secure safe and affordable housing. Second is speed. Post-COVID or even COVID accelerated the impact, the disproportionate impact of some of these issues on the most vulnerable. So we needed to move faster, and we weren't built for that. I mean, we just weren't built to move faster. And then the last thing is the complexity. James is right. How do you simplify this issue into understandable, easy to follow terms, and at the same time get enough information across for people to feel like they can follow you on this, right? Like they can go with you a little bit further on this. So I think those were some key things. And to my friends out here on this webinar, I respectfully say, don't lead with lawyers. That was the other thing we learned. Do not have lawyers out front trying to explain why this is so important and to the extent how people can get the help they need. That was a non-starter.
I'm gonna continue and ask a follow question, because you spoke about the ecosystem in response to the insights you were offering the audience. And community leadership is one of the things that CF Leads espouse to, and cross-sector partnerships in particular. Can you talk about how you're able to keep partners aligned at the table over a sustained period of time, and even with the course corrections and the things that come up in this work, because it's adaptive and it has to be flexible, I'm assuming. Can you talk about how you are able to keep partners at the table?
I think the nature of this work forces those conversations, because the machine that the LISC team has built relies on several parts working at the same pace in the same cadence, serving the same individuals. So it's naturally, I mean, and I'll let Christopher go deeper, but I think there's kind of almost a baked in necessity that folks across different roles communicate with one another. That includes funders, that includes, providers of legal services, that includes neighborhood organizations, to make sure that resources are directed at the right time, whether those be financial coming from a funder, or whether that be time and talent coming from a nonprofit to address a community need as kind of more relationships are built and pockets of residents who are in need of those services are identified.
Awesome.
I think that's right. I mean, I would say, I think there's value in a place like Jacksonville. It helps to have what we're doing validated by someone, third party, sort of who's doing something similar, or someone able to sort of spotlight, here's what we're seeing in a similar situated market, and here's how we're attacking it. So learning from others faster, again, this learning by doing is super helpful. And then frankly, it's results. You want to keep people at the table, we got to get some stuff done early and have some promise for more of that, right? That can compound, right? And so it seems to me that's how we were able to keep people together, because once we saw some success, we got a taste of what we could do.
Thank you. And that actually leads to another question I'm gonna ask of Ross and Leslie, those results. As we think about best practices and promising practices, can you explain or expound how you're able to not only identify but qualify those promising and best practices? What is used as the evidence of what's working versus what's not working? And even if you can even pepper in how, well, I'll stop with that question because I don't want to make it too loaded, and then I'll ask the follow-up question next.
Okay, now I'm scared. So for identifying particular program models, a few different ways. The first is we start with the very large federal and sometimes philanthropically led clearinghouses, which essentially contract with armies of researchers who are able to review academic work, evaluate the methodology, the strength of the program design, and then those organizations create sort of a kind of scale ranking the evidence. So we draw from that as sort of our first cookie crumbs of which programs feel most relevant to the catalog. And we pull from the strongest rated programs in those resources, and then we create the range of content around those. So that's when we come in with working with program leads, working with the places that have actually put those programs into action to identify implementation best practices, those key design characteristics, the stakeholders that needed to be at the table, all of that kinds of stuff. So the big clearinghouses are step one for us. We recognize that those clearinghouses are rather slow moving, and oftentimes the threshold for entry is very high in terms of program, evaluation design. So we are working with a range of organizations. So groups like the Urban Institute, MDRC, Mathematica, JPAL, to identify other sorts of programs that have been evaluated, sometimes through those experimental methods, other times through quasi-experimental or less rigorous designs, to make sure we're pulling in more of the promising programs, more of the earlier stage stuff that hasn't quite reached that threshold of longitudinal study that takes many, many years to demonstrate impact, just so we can make sure we have at least our fingers a bit into the pool of promising practices rather than the initiatives that have been around for 10, 15 years. So those are the two primary methods for the program briefs. We can talk about the case study component, which is a little bit different. I guess I can say just real quick, as we're making decisions about case studies, we do not need you to have a randomized control trial that's demonstrated impact over time in your community. We recognize that that is extremely expensive, takes a long time, and that would prevent us from telling stories from across the country in the way that we want to lift up great work. So we look for 1 year of results, at least. If it can be independently demonstrated, that's great. It doesn't need to be. The biggest thing for us is assessing a program in terms of its adherence to some of the key components that we've identified in our strategy pages that are most relevant to that program. So when working with Christopher on this case study, we wanted to make sure that this was tied to some of the best practices that we'd identified in displacement prevention, some of the best practices that we'd identified in wealth building strategies. We made the determination ourselves that this was clearly an excellent example of that. There was this great data of impact, so that's what led us to move forward.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, you pretty much answered my second question. I was going to make reference to just those organizations that may be taking the approach of looking at grounded theory and innovative programming and trying to figure out which measures and metrics that they could deploy or employ to measure progress. But you somewhat answered that, so I'm not going to ask that question. I'm going to ask this one more question for the group. And programs are extremely needed, helpful in work in partnership with policy or system changes. So can you provide insights of how you've been able to navigate state level policy changes, and just I'll keep it simple so to be a broader response. So how were you able to navigate and be able to look at policy levers as an opportunity for change within a local community? So that'd be the last question. It's open.
I'll take a stab at it. So there are funding streams that flow from state to local municipalities and rural, urban, suburban um, localities, right? And so those are often for housing related programs. What we did was look at how the eligible activities, we looked at eligible activities, Doc, and we helped the state administrators broadened the definition of eligible activities to include the work we were doing around airship. So we tied airship to housing counseling is essentially the point here. And so to the extent one can think about their intervention, financial or otherwise, and perhaps tie it to an existing funding program that's flowing to a local government, and thinking about how might local government, how might folks reimagine the eligible activities and thereby opening up that funding pool for experimenting with said program. Okay, so I hope that wasn't too confusing, but bottom line, what we did was we took an issue like housing counseling and said airship can fit underneath it. And that made it eligible for housing counseling dollars that were already flowing.
Awesome, awesome. We have what, 1 minute remaining, 60 seconds. Is there any other comments or anything you want to posit as it relates to the last question or anything else for the good of the order?
I think the answer Christopher just gave is a great one, but I'll add going the next step beyond that was also helping regionalize. That was seated here in Duval County, and based on those learnings, it was able to go out to the surrounding counties, Clay, Putnam, St. John's, where the problem exists too. But with the kind of the network and the partners across the region, I think we're able to take that policy learning and help spread it to other parts of Northeast Florida.
Awesome.
And just tying it to economic opportunity. So RFA helped me rethink the work we were doing in relationship to economic opportunity. And that was super helpful.
Thanks. All right. Any final thoughts, Ross or Leslie? All right. Well, I would like to thank you all. This was extremely great. And I want to thank everyone who was able to join us today. But like I said, I just would like to just give a shout out to Results for America, the Community Foundation for Northeast Florida, and LISC Jacksonville for an insightful conversation. Furthermore, we've been gathering feedback from community foundations across the country to better understand how we can support your economic mobility efforts and provide the resources you need to drive meaningful change in your communities. Your input is incredibly valuable to us, and we encourage you to continue sharing your insights. As my colleague will now share in the chat, please take a few moments to complete our survey using the link provided. Your feedback will help shape our future programming and ensure that we're meeting your needs accordingly. We greatly appreciate your time and thoughtful responses. And also looking ahead, I would like to highlight some ways to stay connected with CF Leads and continue the conversation. First, be sure to subscribe to our newsletter and stay informed about our latest offerings, upcoming events, and resources designed to support your work. Additionally, we invite you to explore opportunities to become an investor in our mission. Your support allows us to continue providing valuable programs and resources to community foundations across the country. And lastly, keep an eye out for other offerings, including future webinars, peer learning opportunities, or our action networks that are very similar to the Economic Mobility Action Network, such as our Sustainable Development Goals Action Network, which is getting ready to launch shortly. We're committed to being your partner on this journey and providing the tools you need to drive change locally. So thank you again for your participation today, and be well, everyone.